he gives a name to as the Irre. And the Irre, as I understand it, is the negative component of the revelation of truth. Now, conceiving truth now as given to us rather than being discovered by Dasein through its phenomenological analyses. That said, the rigor of that position seems to insist upon the fact that any discovery of truth includes its own limit. Then it's a valid Greek experience. We can't be at all unless we agree to the limits that contain us. But part of that containment of disclosure is the fact that everything that it contains is permeated by this negative component of truth that he calls Irre. So Irre then, from my understanding of him, is an essential component of his experience of truth and the possibility of moving through that experience to a deeper experience of life as we experience. Well, it becomes immediately clear that if being itself is permeated by a negative component, there is a notness in the revelation and a notness in our discovery of it that he embodies in the notion of Irre. And there's a point in his essay, I think it's in number 6 or number 7, at the end of 6. Anyway, you'll recall it, where he talks about the inescapability of the negative component of truth, and he says, except, is there any way to bypass that inescapability? And his answer is no, except by recognizing it for what it is, and taking account of it, and making do with the experience as best one can. And it's that very moment where it seems to me where he has seen the problem and suggested a solution to the problem, where he goes on and dismisses his own warning. And then the rest of the essay on truth is a victim of that. And therefore I personally consider that if his philosophy failed him, it's because he failed to acknowledge that essential point of his experience, namely that it's possible to avoid the victimization by the negativity of finitude is by recognizing as such and taking account of it and moving on. And that is what I think, what I find to be the tragic moment of his failure, or the failure of his philosophy. It wasn't strong enough to protect him from the very thing his genius permitted him to discover.
It's interesting because the theme of the conference, of course, that Alfred Denker and Holger Zaborowski have put together here for us, is Freiheit und Geschichte.
Right.
And so what's intriguing is that Geschick, the Geschick, or is it Geschick? I think it is Geschick. And my connection with Geschichte is just because you're talking so powerfully about Geschichte. But Geschick would also be the problem. Razón, this is destiny, we sometimes say, fate, circumstance, where we find ourselves, what finds us. That is maybe something that one would have thought that Heidegger's experience with discernment might have helped him with, but I guess it did not.
Yes, I think it would have marked a further step in his search. But there is one fact that I don't have not mentioned. It was in his letter to me, where I asked him really to repeat in writing what he had said in personal conversation. I was hoping that he would include this element of negativity, and he doesn't include it as markedly as I'm marking it now. But what's strange to me, it was striking to me, is at the end of his life, in 76. I think he died in May of 76, or in any case, as my memory is that in February of 76, he called Bernhard Welter and asked him if Welter would come and visit him. Bernhard Welter, as we all know, was himself a fine thinker and a fine Heideggerian, but a Roman Catholic priest and a faithful one who was very sensitive to all the ambiguities that what I've just said open up. And he asked him, apparently he asked Welter a question, namely, would Welter say a word at his funeral? Now, this was not a religious word as such, and there was to be no religious ceremony, but this was to be simply at the grave a final word of a student become friend whom he trusted, to just say a word. And Welter apparently said, well, I'll do anything you want, but how can I, as a priest and a student, how can I say anything when you've been so explicitly atheistic, in the strictest sense of that word? You have excluded God as part of your problematic. And Heidegger allegedly supposed, well, I never really left the church. Ich bin nie aus der Kirche getreten, if I understand the word. But Welter said, well, fine, but I'll be glad to do. But tell me something to talk about. What do you want me to say? Is there any text of Hölderlin that you would like me to reflect upon? And Heidegger's answer was, yes, that text of the Gospel where Jesus says, ask and you shall receive, seek and you shall find, knock and it shall be opened unto you. Now, one can interpret that in many ways, in most negative form you can imagine, but you can also interpret it as up to the last he remained with his question, and at least he was faithful to that. And humanly speaking, he was not a model of virtue that anyone would claim, but at least he was faithful to his question. And that basic openness to the question, which under the best of circumstances you could say is, maybe there's more to know about truth, that I'm never quite satisfied. Well, that's the way I hear it, and so I honor that, So maybe there is that final question that he had and asked Welter to address when he was lying in the grave, and that's very meaningful to me. That the question remained open long after his disciples had buried him, and that's a final openness to a question, and the question remains valid for anyone who seriously wishes to philosophize, and particularly one who wishes to follow him in his effort to discern the truth in all its finitude and all its eventual hopefulness.
Okay. Thank you very much for
You're welcome.
this conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you for listening.